The caravan slowed as they came to the surrounding suburbs of the city. Scorched and crumpled cars still in the driveways. Roofs of houses collapsed. Front doors still open, if not torn from the hinges. Many had only had time to flee with what they could on their way out. A weathered heel of a woman's shoe allowed the viewer to see just how sudden the incident had been. The attacks had more than likely happened when many were arriving home. Most had never gotten even a few moments to shake off the stress procured earlier that day, apologize to the wife, and pick up the kids. Homes left intact were done up in styles grossly out of date. Vehicle models that had been retired decades ago. Even to their grandparents, this war was old. The tanks moved along easily. A few small craters in the road still left room to maneuver around them. Fawn's purple eyes narrowed as they passed the first set of skyscrapers, pockmarked and torn open from airstrikes and artillery called away long ago. Those that had sent down the order, dead. Most likely, never having witnessed the carnage of their legacies. Fawn gazed up into the lurid recess of an office building, knowing that death was glaring back at her. She turned to Fletchett, knowing the steel-eyed woman had seen the same thing. As Fawn gazed back to the shadowed hole above, she thought she saw the figure that had visited her the night before. Long arms. She zoomed in on the area with her visor. Surely he was there performing maintenance on his great guns. Her visor told her there had been nothing, and yet it had detected movement. She turned slightly to Fletchett and began to open her mouth, but then thought better. To start a patrol off by claiming to be seeing vanishing people, let alone men, would not be good for her command or her career, even though she had nowhere else to fall. They rolled through a long, empty intersection. Lights extinguished and street signs twisted and gnarled like roots of some ancient tree. Concrete dust and splintered glass lay on the street like freshly fallen snow. Shadows inside of windowless storefronts hid abominations that could only be perceived by their noses. Fawn and the other woman brought up their scarves to cover their faces. Behind her own, Fawn rubbed her tongue over her teeth. How could there still be fresh death here? Had the front been pushed back this far? Fawn's body jerked as the tank trudged along the battered road. She could see by the markers ahead that they were almost to the sector they were supposed to be clearing, known as cleaning to her Aunt Kari. But Fawn never minced words when it came to her work. They were here to murder anyone with a gold uniform, surrender or not, men or not. The courtesies lent to enemy soldiers in the past had been spit on by the Golden Fossas list of war crimes. Even after the war, Fawn could never share a beer with a Fossa, even if they picked up the tab. "All right, girls, here we are. Time to knock on some doors," Gazelle said. All of the tank gunners began to pan their barrels at the darkened windows of the gutted buildings. Fawn hopped off the tank and activated the actuators on the toy box. Her fire team followed, as did everyone in her squad. Their faces were emotionless stone masks. Already, the other squad leaders were rushing into buildings further back. Fawn jerked her head back, and her squad posted on her. She gave them their orders, which they nodded back in agreement. They had already gotten over Fawn's incessant need to take point. The woman seemed to enjoy gambling with her life, taking point into every building. Her bravado had gained her notoriety for being slightly crazy and insanely lucky. The odds of being shot down or blown up by being the first to breach were high, yet Fawn lived on, scratched and bruised, but alive. With an expert move, Fawn jerked the toy box upward, and then rotated it, so that it would hit the ground vertically on its left side, indicated by the black square tip. The machine broke apart and then snapped together again into the form of a battering ram. She then set it to transform into a close-quarters battle rifle immediately after impact. The women stacked against the walls of the building on either side of the entrance, with Fawn's fire team closest to it. Fawn nodded once, and the other team leaders nodded back. Fawn's focus became amazingly sharp. She had pushed out all thoughts of what could be on the other side of the door, only that it was already dead, and she had killed it. She allowed a heavy, stale breath to escape from her parched lips, and then swung the instrument full force into the barricaded door. The door and the furniture behind it splintered to prickly dust as the pressurized air escaped from the device with a monstrous hiss. Just as it was designed to do, the toy box immediately converted to a battle rifle, and Fawn charged in from the momentum still carrying her visor set to thermal. They swept the room quickly, finding nothing, but someone had been there. Used cooking utensils were scattered about, the windows had been covered, and a few wrinkly porno mags were sitting in the corner. Slowly they crept towards the stairs. Then Fawn gave the signal to halt. She sucked in a few quick breaths of sour air to get her blood up, and pinched her nostrils quickly. She knew that someone up there wanted to taste her blood, and the thought enraged her. But was she alone in her anger? What lesser would have the gall to strike out against her? And how could she, or rather, they, respect any lesser that submitted to the boot? Surrender garnered nothing but contempt. A bitter taste filled her mouth as her saliva glands worked and her gums began to swell. The grip she had on her weapon was made of steel. Then she nodded and charged up the stairs with her eyes barely level with the floor. Her mind began to plan out her next steps. They were at the end of a long, dark gallery. With her left hand, she held up 2 fingers, then 3, and pointed to the deck behind. Immediately, Letchway and Chittle got into position behind her, their barrels aimed down the hall. She then held 4 fingers, and Fletchett posted with the penny black, aimed just inward of the wall. The other soldiers looked puzzled, then understood as they saw Fawn stand before the back entrance of the office. When a signal came, Fletchett fired the EP rifle, tearing through every room and out of the building, and then Fawn charged the office, finding 2 men split in half on the other side. Fawn strafed behind a dusty boardroom table. Then she heard Letchway and Chittle firing. The others who had been missed by the shot had run into the hallway. She crept closer to an open door and on the other side of the room, and then fired a stitch through the wall before entering. A man with an axe collapsed behind the entrance. From behind a desk, a knife-wielding woman dove toward Fawn, pressing her against the wall. She was in a tattered FASA uniform, her face covered in grime and war paint. She brought the knife down next to Fawn's head, just missing her antlers. Fawn pushed her away. She grabbed the close-quarters handle of the toy box, and the weapon dropped like a stone, leaving her with a smaller unit. The stock folded into place, and Fawn sprayed the woman, leaving hot brass twisting on the floor. Machine gun fire sent Fawn sprawling against the deck. She stuck the handheld back into the toy box, instantly reloading it. Another volley of machine gun fire thumped against the walls, leaving rotted wood chips and plaster sprinkled about the room. She could hear voices on the other side of the wall, but could not make out their plans. She glanced around the room, and then whispered into her antler microphone after the shooting had stopped. "Move up," Fawn said. Soon as she had said it, the bookcase fell over onto the desk she was hiding behind, just missing her head. 2 women came from behind it, and before Fawn could raise her weapon, a woman fired her sidearm directly at her. Fawn could see the hammer pulling back, and the slide moving across the barrel, even heard the spring being squeezed inside the weapon, taking all the time in the world. She waited an eternity for that spinning bullet to come out of that rifled barrel, but it was tardy. Then the 2 women collapsed, and she turned around to see Letchway, holding her rifle confidently. The bore of the gun seemed bigger than her head. She looked back to the women, who were dead behind the desk, both nearly ripped in half from Letchway's machine gun. Then Fawn looked at the dead woman's gun, and where it had been fired. The bullet had fallen to the floor, its nose flattened and warped. There had been nothing to shield her from it, no time to activate the shield on the toy box. The barrel of the dead woman's gun was still smoking. "What's up?" Fletchett said, hefting the rifle that was larger than her. "Don't know," Fawn said, looking at the hole in the ground, as he was unsure how she had not been struck down. The aim of the gun that had fired was true. She picked up the bullet and rolled it between her fingers. Condensation moistened her fingertips. "All clear here, Sarge. They're checking the penthouse now," a woman said. "Yeah," Fawn said. Fawn headed up to the penthouse. It was perceived to be clear until the blanket hung against the window shifted. Fawn sniffed and fired a stitch into it. The brown service blanket of the Fossas poured blood out from underneath it. Letchway tore the blanket away to find a disheveled, dying Fossa behind it. He was twitching and trembling, as if he was fighting the freezing cold. He collapsed from the window frame onto the deck, Then Letchway grabbed her sidearm and fired a single round into his skull, emptying it onto the weathered hardwood floor. Then the rest of the women turned away without any more thought to it, as if someone had crushed a roach underfoot a little too loudly. They crept towards the boarded and blanketed windows, wary of snipers. Fawn turned back towards Fletchett. Her pale skin made her look ghostly amongst the brown-skinned and tanned women. "This good for you?" Fawn said. It was her squad's turn to provide a sniper for overwatch. Fletchett looked around the room and nodded. Fawn then addressed the rest of her squad, and they followed her to the entrance. As Fawn approached the door, she shouted, "We're coming out!" "We got eyes on the position I'm sending you," Fawn said. She took out a small touchscreen keypad and punched in the coordinates of the building, then routed the data to every soldier in the 203rd. All their allies in the area, as well as their command. Fawn headed out into the street as other soldiers scurried by. She found Gazelle and the rest of her crew gawking at the porno mags found inside. Fawn reached into her pocket and pulled out a stick of gum, flicking the wrapper away and joining the tank crew. "Any good?" Fawn said, leaning against the tank. "These two suck. Bunch of male ego shit. They're all females, all right. I don't know if that's your thing yet." "Yet," Fawn said, elbows hiked by her shoulders against the tank. "Ain't no sense in wanting something that ain't there, Dearborn. At least out here, anyway. Prince Charming got the keys to the ride now, and he drives like shit, because he can," Gazelle said. Fawn sighed. "Yeah, I just can't help what I like, you know? I'm not knocking you," Fawn said. I know. Hope you find your prince," Gazelle said.